I found out my husband planned to divorce me, so I moved my assets. 1 month later he filed. Then panicked when his plan completely failed. He came to beg to change his decision to divorce, but that's not happening. Hello, thank you for your support. This means a lot to us. We're on a journey to our first 100 subscribers. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to James Rice from Birmingham. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. I wasn't supposed to see the email. It was one of those glitches the universe throws like a warning shot. His phone buzzed while he was in the shower, screen lighting up just long enough for me to catch the subject line. Final draft separation timeline. That was the moment. Not the moment he left. Not the moment he lied. This, a 4-second glimpse of an attachment he thought was safely buried in a folder I'd never have access to. But I had always been good with patterns. And in that instant, the pattern of his withdrawal, his late nights, the passive silence, the sudden carefulness with money, snapped into focus. He was planning to leave me. Not impulsively. Not emotionally. But like a project, like a merger, like a perfectly timed exit strategy with me as the liability he was about to offload. I didn't open the email right away. I just stared at the notification, the weight of it pressing like a stone against my ribs. I could hear him humming behind the door, casual, unbothered, probably shampooing his hair like nothing was coming. Like he hadn't spent the past 6 months preparing to erase me. I remember blinking hard, swallowing something bitter, and putting his phone back face down. That's the part that still replays in my mind, how calmly I set it down. How even in that moment I didn't scream or confront or cry. I just walked into the kitchen and sat at the edge of the cold marble counter, heart beating through my palms, knowing that everything I thought was stable had already been stolen out from under me. Later that night, I waited until he was asleep to open it on his laptop. Password was the same. His mother's birthday. That part stung too, like every detail of his life was guarded by someone else's importance. The file was polished, clinical. Bullet points. Deadlines. Quiet exits. Goal. Initiate separation by May 1st. Avoid conflict. Protect primary assets. Minimize financial exposure. My name was nowhere in the file, like I was already gone. Just a timeline. Like I was an inconvenience being phased out. I read it twice. Then I read it again. There was no mention of cheating. No other woman. Just strategy. As if I was a burden he'd finally found the courage to discard. As if all those dinners I cooked while he stared at his phone, all the weekends I planned around his impossible schedule, all the years of softening my edges to keep our peace, meant nothing. Not even a footnote. And still I didn't cry. Not that night. Not even the next day. Instead, I made a second cup of coffee and opened a spreadsheet of my own. Mine was titled, Contingency Plan Me. He thought I'd never leave because I never raised my voice. That was his mistake. Assuming silence meant submission, not calculation. I stopped asking him where he was going at night. I stopped offering to pack his lunch in the mornings. I just let the air grow still between us, a quiet so subtle it took on the shape of normal. But inside, I was building an exit that would land harder than any slammed door ever could. I didn't need to burn the house down. I just needed to let him walk out and realize too late the locks had changed behind him. The first thing I did was move the money. Not everything. Just mine. The part of my salary that had been trickling into our joint account for years without question. I opened a new account at a different bank during lunch one Tuesday. I wore red lipstick that day, the same shade I used to wear before I started muting myself to keep the peace. Felt like war paint. Within 2 weeks, I had rerouted my direct deposit, closed my small investment portfolio, and removed my name from the line of credit he opened without telling me last fall.
No confrontaschen.
Just a digital vanishing, one signature at a time. Then I started collecting passwords, streaming services, utilities, the online backup for the home office he never bothered to encrypt. His cloud storage held more than just files. It held screenshots, text messages to friends about waiting for the right moment, notes from a lawyer whose name I recognized from a dinner party 3 months ago. He was further along in the process than I thought. That's when the shaking started. Just in my hands at first. Rage disguised as adrenaline. But even then, I didn't send a single text. I just saved the files to a thumb drive and hid it in the lining of an old handbag I hadn't used in years. He didn't notice a thing. Some nights he kissed me before bed. And I let him. Not because I loved him anymore, but because I wanted to remember how it felt to be touched by someone who had already decided you were disposable. There's a kind of slow horror in pretending. I wore it like a second skin, smiling during dinners, laughing at his coworkers' jokes when we saw them in passing. I was an actress in a play he didn't realize had already ended. I started therapy. Not because I was breaking, but because I refused to let this story end with me crushed. I told my therapist everything minus the names. She didn't tell me to confront him. She told me to prepare. That anger comes later. That grief arrives in waves. That survival, real survival, is quiet and often unnoticed. Like blood clotting beneath a bandage. I left her office that day and walked 5 miles home. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel the burn in my legs, wanted the ache to match the one sitting inside my chest. By the end of the month, I had taken everything I needed. Personal documents. Diplomas. The small photo album I kept hidden at the back of the bookshelf. And one night, while he was out working late, I copied the divorce timeline file and left a sticky note on the desk. You left the door open. That was it. No fight.
No explosión.
Just evidence that I knew. When he came home, I was already in bed, facing the wall. He didn't say a word. Maybe he thought it meant nothing. Maybe he thought I'd still be here when the papers came. That I'd cry, beg, shatter. He had no idea I'd already disappeared. Long before he ever filed. The morning after he filed, he brought me coffee. That was his tell. Small gestures when he knew he'd done something monstrous. Like putting a band-aid on a severed limb. I took the mug without looking at him. No smile, no thank you. Just silence thick enough to stir into the cream. He lingered a little too long by the counter, waiting for some reaction. But I just sipped. Slowly. Quietly. As if nothing had changed. As if he hadn't just handed me a piece of paper designed to unravel everything we had ever built. I didn't ask why. I already knew. He wanted out without blood on his hands. That's why the file was so neat, so clinical. He was trying to architect a guilt-free exodus. Make me look like the irrational one if I broke down. Make his friends say, she was always a little intense. But I didn't break down. I didn't even flinch. The truth is, by the time he handed me the documents, I had already buried the version of myself that loved him. The woman who bent herself into something smaller so he could shine. She died the night I saw that email. Everything since then had just been aftershock. I spent that week unlearning everything. Unlearning how to make space for him when he walked into a room. Unlearning the instinct to defend him when friends made snide comments about his temper. Unlearning the need to explain myself every time I spent money, as if it wasn't mine too. The hardest part wasn't mourning the marriage. It was realizing how much of myself I'd sacrificed to keep it alive. I had shrunk to fit his version of a good wife. Polite. Predictable. Silent in conflict. I used to think that made me strong. Now, I saw it for what it was. Conditioning. A slow erasure disguised as love. My therapist said something that stuck. She said, sometimes what hurts isn't losing them. It's realizing they never saw you. That line followed me everywhere, on walks, in the shower, echoing in the silence of our apartment. It hit hardest at night, when I'd roll over and instinctively reach for a man who was still there physically, but long gone in every way that mattered. Those were the moments that stripped me raw. Not because I wanted him back, but because I hated how badly I'd wanted to be enough for someone who had already decided I wasn't. So I started changing things. I painted the second bedroom, turned it into an office with nothing of his in it. I began waking up early just to walk alone before the city stirred. I bought a cheap punching bag on Craigslist and beat the hell out of it every night, imagining his face, then mine, then no one's, just rage itself. And slowly, the numbness gave way to something sharper. Not hope. Not yet. But hunger. Hunger for air. For space. For a version of myself that didn't revolve around his moods or schedules or passive punishments. He noticed, of course. Asked if something was wrong. I told him, not anymore. That answer made him squint, like I was speaking in a dialect he hadn't heard before. He watched me differently after that, curious, maybe even nervous. but still sure he was in control. He thought the filing would break me, that I'd beg, that I'd fight for the scraps. But I was done fighting for someone who had already let go. I was learning how to want more. And when the time came to really return, he wouldn't be ready for who I'd become. He thought he was in the power seat when he filed, like it was a game of chess, and he'd made the opening move. That was always his problem, mistaking silence for surrender, mistaking kindness for weakness. He underestimated me the way men like him always underestimate women who don't scream. I didn't challenge the divorce. I signed what I needed to sign, calmly, neatly, no objections. And because of that, he thought I hadn't seen it coming, that I was too shocked to react. He didn't know I'd already stripped the accounts, already updated my beneficiaries, already wiped the emotional fingerprints he'd left all over my identity. I let him believe he was winning. That's how you kill a man like that. Not with fury, but with indifference. He started calling 3 weeks later. First about logistics, a utilities bill in both our names, a package accidentally sent to the apartment. Then came the ones without any purpose at all, just checking in, he'd say. Wanted to make sure you were okay. That's when I knew it had started to unravel for him. His plan had been clean. Leave me quietly, keep the sympathy, retain the reputation, hold on to his curated image of amicable ex-husband. But instead word had spread. Turns out silence speaks. Our mutual friends were cautious around him now. One even reached out to me, Caroline from his old firm. She said, I heard what happened. You're handling it with so much grace. That word, grace, it landed like a blade sharpened just for him. Because grace is what people say when you're not the mess they expected. When you don't cry publicly or post cryptic stories or burn his clothes on the front lawn. He wanted a storm he could frame as hysteria. Instead, he got a calm so cold it left him outside in it. Then came the real shift. He showed up one evening, unannounced, carrying a bottle of wine like this was some awkward date night and not the aftermath of emotional annihilation. I opened the door just enough to see his face. Tight smile, faint dark circles under his eyes. He said, I've been doing some thinking. I may have rushed things. That's when I knew. Knew he hadn't planned for the story to flip on him. Knew he'd started noticing the subtle retractions in his social orbit. People who used to laugh a little too hard at his jokes now keeping a polite distance. I didn't let him in. I just leaned against the doorframe, wine bottle between us like a silent joke. He tried again. We were good together. Maybe we could talk? Just talk. His voice cracked a little on the last word. That was new. Vulnerability didn't come naturally to him. But it wasn't real, not remorse, just regret. Regret that the life he thought he could control had started spinning without him. That I hadn't crumbled on cue. That I had moved inwardly, outwardly, completely. I smiled. It wasn't cruel. It was clean. Pure. Like glass held up to the sun. I said, I already talked. You just didn't listen. Then I closed the door. Gently.
No slam.
No words over words. Just the unmistakable finality of a woman who was no longer interested in being reclaimed. That was the night he started unraveling. And I watched it all happen from a distance he could no longer cross. He came back 4 days later, different this time, Messier. No wine, no smile, no pretense. Just him standing in the hallway like someone who'd been hit by a truth he couldn't shake. His shirt was wrinkled. His hair unwashed. It was raining, but he didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he wanted to look tragic, like he thought I'd still fall for that kind of theater. He knocked 3 times. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see what defeat looked like on him. He didn't wait to be invited in. Just started talking the second the door cracked open. I made a mistake. The words came fast, tripping over themselves, raw and out of order. I wasn't thinking straight. Everything was moving too fast. He stopped himself, searching my face for something familiar. Some echo of the old softness I used to give so freely. I let him look. Let him hope. I didn't move. I didn't speak. And that silence, more than anything, unnerved him. 'Cause that was new. The old me would have filled the quiet with reassurance. Not anymore. He tried to step inside. I didn't let him. He looked down at his shoes, water pooling beneath them, and said, I thought you'd fight for us. I thought. He broke off. laughing under his breath like he couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. I thought you'd fall apart. I guess I didn't realize how ready you were to be done. That was the thing, wasn't it? He never wanted me. He just wanted to be wanted by me. My devotion was his reflection. And when that mirror cracked, he lost more than a marriage. He lost his self-image. The idea that he was the one in control. That he was the one who got to walk away clean. I could see it on him now, the unraveling in real time. His world had shrunk since the day he filed. His story hadn't landed the way he thought it would. People weren't nodding and agreeing with his version. They were asking questions. Siding quietly with me. I didn't cheat, he said suddenly, like that was some kind of prize. I never cheated on you. I tilted my head. You didn't have to. He blinked. I think that landed harder than anything else I could have said. Because he'd been telling himself that lie for weeks now. At least I wasn't cruel, at least I didn't betray her like that. But he had. In every other way that mattered. With his silence. With his planning. With his decision to write me out of a future I helped build. Without even the decency to tell me to my face. His hands were shaking now. I want to fix it, he said. I've been talking to someone. A therapist. I've started making changes. I've been reading books, journaling. I realize I didn't treat you like a partner. I treated you like an accessory. The word hung there between us. And for once he didn't try to take it back. He just stood there, dripping and breaking. But I wasn't there to hold him up anymore. You're not asking for me, I said, voice low even. You're asking for another chance to not feel like the villain. He opened his mouth, closed it. And in that silence I think he understood. Not just that it was over, but that it had been over long before the papers, before the conversations, maybe even before the email. It ended the moment I stopped needing his version of love to define me. He left without another word. And this time I didn't watch him go. It didn't happen all at once. Men like him don't implode publicly, not in the beginning. They flinch in small ways, trying to plug the holes before anyone sees the leak. But the truth has a way of seeping through, staining everything it touches. And his carefully constructed life, sharp suits, tight narratives, clean breaks, was no longer holding. I didn't have to say a word. People started noticing on their own. The first crack was social. We'd been regulars at a bar downtown. Always sitting at the same corner booth on Fridays. Always laughing just a little too loudly to prove we were okay. After the split, I stopped going. He didn't. But the laughter around him changed. Softer. Uneasy. People he once counted on to echo his stories now watched him closely. Like they were waiting for something unsaid to slip through. And it did. He couldn't help it. He started talking too much. Over-explaining. Rewriting history in real time. It was mutual, he'd say. She needed space. I gave it to her. But everyone knew I hadn't left the apartment first. He did. Then came work. A former colleague of his reached out through LinkedIn of all places. Polite, professional, curious. She congratulated me on my new role. The consulting work I'd picked up. The way I seemed to land on my feet so gracefully. The subtext was razor sharp. She was fishing, which meant the gossip had reached the office. And in corporate circles, perception is currency. He had always curated the image of a decisive man. Ambitious. Clear-eyed. But the version floating around now was Messier. That he'd fumbled the timing. That he'd miscalculated. That he'd underestimated the woman he tried to discard quietly. I heard he was passed over for a promotion. A new client project. One he'd expected to lead. Was handed off to someone younger, less polished, but with fewer personal distractions. That's what they called it. Personal distractions. Not the divorce. Not the collapse. Just a vague term passed around in hush-toned meetings and blind-copied emails. And he hated it. The ambiguity. The pity. He tried to spin it, of course. Told friends he was prioritizing his mental health. That he'd taken a step back by choice. But people notice when your hands start shaking during presentations. When your calendar clears a little too often. When your ex-wife posts a single photo of herself on a rooftop, smiling, champagne in hand, and everyone silently wonders how she looks better after everything. That photo wasn't an accident. It was the first picture of me alone in months, taken by a stranger at a networking event. I wore a black jumpsuit and no ring. I posted it with no caption. Just the location tag. Finally here. And for once it wasn't about him. It was about me. But the ripple effect was undeniable. 3 of his colleagues liked it. One of them commented, "Well deserved." A small fracture in the narrative he'd built. He called again the next day. I didn't answer. Then came the texts. "I miss you. I hate how this ended. Can we talk?" I left them unread. Not to be cruel, but because there was nothing left to say. The reckoning he was feeling now wasn't punishment. It was consequence. The echo of choices made in silence, now returning like a tide. A mutual friend told me he cried at a dinner party, said my name mid-sentence, and went quiet. Glass in his hand, jaw clenched. Someone asked if he was okay. He said, "I thought she'd wait for me." That was the moment, I think, when he finally understood. I wasn't waiting. I never was. Because while he was unraveling, I was becoming. By the end of summer, he was a shell of the man who filed those papers. Not ruined. Not destroyed. Just hollow. The kind of emptiness that walks into a room and doesn't shift the air. He still dressed the same. Pressed shirts, expensive watches. Those loafers he thought made him look older than he was. But the posture had changed. The arrogance had drained out of his spine. There was a sag in his shoulders now. A softness in his jaw. The look of someone who had bet on a fantasy version of himself and lost. He started messaging mutuals. Not about me, not directly. Just small odd attempts at connection. A DM reacting to someone's story. A comment under a photo that felt out of place. "We should catch up soon." That kind of thing. The quiet social bleed of a man trying to reattach himself to relevance. But people remember. They remember how quickly he filed. How carefully he erased me in the beginning. And now that he was unraveling, there wasn't much appetite to help him hold the pieces. I never said a single bad word about him. That was the thing that made it worse. I let him ruin his own name. I let the truth float out in fragments. Through the way I carried myself, the timing of my rebound, the silence I kept when others would have screamed. He had nothing to fight against. No villain to point to. Just the growing awareness that he had become the problem in his own story. He started drinking more. I knew it without being told. His brother mentioned it offhandedly at a party I didn't even know he'd be at. Said he's not doing great, but he won't talk about it. There was a pause. Then, he asked about you. Said you've changed. Said you feel far away. I just smiled and took a sip of wine. Because I had changed. But not for him. For me. There's a certain loneliness that only comes when the consequences start breathing down your neck. I saw it in him the next time we crossed paths. Accidentally, at a downtown gallery opening. He wasn't expecting to see me there. I was dressed in all white. Clean. Calm. Unreachable. He froze mid-sentence with someone else, and stared like he was looking at something he once owned, but no longer recognized. I gave him a soft, effortless nod. Not cruel. Not angry. Just done. He looked away first. Later, I heard he left early. Alone. He'd been dating someone new, young, overly styled, curated for optics, but she hadn't come with him that night. Maybe they'd broken up. Maybe he didn't want to be seen next to someone who couldn't hold her own in a room I walked through. Either way, he left before the second set of speeches. And someone told me he was crying in the Uber. Quietly. The kind of crying you do when you realize the thing you lost wasn't just a person. It was the version of yourself you could have been with that person. If you hadn't screwed it all up. I never reached out. He needed to feel it. All of it. The loss. The shame. The humiliation of realizing he'd built his exit with precision, and still managed to end up on the wrong side of it. Because what no one tells you is that the people we discard remember. Not just the moment we're left, but every tiny betrayal that came before it. The things they swallowed. The ways they softened. The parts of themselves they folded away, just to make room for someone who was never going to stay. Now he gets to live with the echo. He lost me when I was still willing to forgive. Now even his name sounds like a past life I barely survived. His last message came on a Thursday. 3 months since the gallery. 7 since the divorce was finalized. It was short. Just one line. I still think about you. No punctuation. No signature. Just enough to test the waters, to see if any part of me would reach back. It sat in my inbox for 2 hours before I deleted it. Not unread, read, absorbed, understood, and then discarded. That's what real closure looks like. Not a confrontation. Not a final scream or a wineglass smash. Just a woman who no longer needs to hold the wound to prove it existed. I was already packed when it came in. The movers had taken the last box down 20 minutes earlier. New apartment, new neighborhood. High ceilings. Soft light. A view that didn't remind me of everything I gave up for comfort disguised as love. I donated half my furniture. Sold the mattress we shared. The couch he picked. Kept only what felt like mine, what always had been, even when I didn't claim it. The place smelled like lemon oil and eucalyptus. Like something beginning. I didn't tell anyone where I was going at first. Not to be secretive, just to protect the stillness I'd earned. Some things don't have to be announced. They just arrive. Quietly. Decisively. Like healing. Like freedom. I changed my number that weekend. Bought a new phone. Walked into the shop with a list of contacts I didn't import. His name was the first one I left behind. Erased not out of spite, but out of necessity. You don't carry ghosts into your rebirth. That Sunday, I lit a candle at dusk. It wasn't symbolic at first, just habit. But I watched the flame stretch and flicker, and it hit me how long it had been since I'd done something just to be near the glow of it. No purpose. No performance. No one watching but me. I poured a glass of wine. Sat on the floor with the windows open, barefoot, music low. And for the first time since the unraveling began, I exhaled. Not cautiously. Not halfway. Fully. Like someone who had walked through the fire and come out baptized in silence. There's a kind of peace that terrifies men like him, because it means they no longer have a thread to pull. No guilt to weaponize. No memory they can twist into an apology. Just stillness. Just distance. Just a woman he once knew and now could never reach. That night, I imagined him lying in his apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the message had delivered. If I'd read it. If I cared. I imagined the weight of that silence pressing into his chest. Not loud but definitive. And I smiled. Not because he lost. But because I didn't. Because I finally understood that survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as deleting a message and never needing to explain why. He'll tell himself stories. That maybe I met someone new. That I got cold. That I never loved him in the first place. But the truth? I loved him enough to become a version of myself that he couldn't even recognize by the end. And I loved myself enough to never go back. If you've ever been underestimated, quietly replaced, or made to feel like you were the backup plan in your own life, this was for you. Drop a comment if you've ever walked away without looking back. Hit like if silence was your revenge. Subscribe for more stories that turn heartbreak into power, and share this with someone who needs to remember. Just because they let you go, doesn't mean they won.